as I'm sure you know from the title of the video, today I'm reviewing the Brawler 64 controller for the Nintendo 64. Now, this controller and other variants of it have been out for quite a while now, but I only recently got one, and I just wanted to share my thoughts about it and what I like, what I don't like, and what I think could possibly be improved for the future. Now, for anyone who doesn't realize, the original Nintendo 64 controller is terrible. It's one of the weirdest controller designs ever. You got this weird pitchfork design, or trident actually is more like it, and you got three handles and buttons all over the place and this horrible thumbstick. Now, a lot of people, especially in the modern day, hate this controller because it's just so different from everything else and it's hard to get used to. Now, personally, I don't hate this. It's, obviously not my favorite controller ever, but it does what it needs to do. It's comfortable enough, and it makes sense for the games it's used in. It allows you to have all sorts of different play styles where you can hold it, like a standard controller for games like Kirby 64, or hold it using the middle and right prongs for games like Mario 64 or Mario Kart, and it really was a good idea. My only complaint really with this controller is the thumbstick. I'm sure you're aware, if you're at all familiar with the Nintendo 64, that these thumbsticks are notorious for failing. They loosen up over time and just don't recenter, and they're just not good. Now, you can get replacement thumbsticks in all sorts of varieties, but that requires you to open up your controller and replace it, and some of them are not that good. Like, I have one that in a certain position it tends to click and kind of catch, and it's annoying. It's really not good, and I didn't want to have to deal with these anymore. So that's where the Brawler 64 comes in. So now, if you're not aware, this is a modern Nintendo 64 controller that clearly more closely resembles modern controllers than the original one. This version in particular is the wireless version. You can plug a wireless receiver into your N64 and you can just sit back on your couch, relax, and not have to worry about your controller cord length or somebody tripping over it, which, that's always one of my biggest concerns. My dogs come by and pull the cable. I don't want to risk the console getting damaged. So this controller is made by Retro Fighters, and they obviously wanted to try and modernize the N64, and I personally think they did a great job with it. So without further ado, let's take a closer look. So now, if you take a look at the packaging for this, the presentation is just extremely nice. It comes in a very good-looking box that very clearly displays the product on it, and it feels like a very premium box in general. It doesn't feel like they cheaped out on the materials or the printing or anything. From a collector's point of view, this box is awesome as you can sit it on your shelf and it's going to look really good in your collection. Opening up the box, we have a few things inside. So the first thing you're going to notice is we have a custom plastic tray that holds the wireless receiver and the controller. Additionally, they included a USB-C charging cable, as this runs on a rechargeable battery, and they also included a keychain of their mascot. So I will note, when I first opened my controller, the turbo button was actually stuck down in the controller. Now, I'm assuming that's because either the charging cable or the keychain probably was pressing weirdly on it in the box, and it kind of just got jammed there. But when I took it out of the box, I just sat it down on a table, and it came back about an hour later, and it had fixed itself, and I haven't had any problems with it since. So if you have the same thing where a button is stuck in, just let it sit for a while, don't worry about it. It will probably fix itself, at least in my experience. Alright, well, now let's take a look at the controller itself. So clearly when you look at it, it looks like a modern controller. It's very similar in shape and size to a Switch Pro controller, which is good for me. I love the Switch Pro controller. Now this comes in many translucent colors like the original N64 controllers. Now I picked red and I think it looks great. The layout here is very much like standard modern controllers, although it only has one analog stick. I will say I had a slight personal issue with this, but it's probably something that's not going to really affect most people. If you take note, the C buttons are actually much bigger on this controller than on the original one. Since this feels so much like a Switch Pro controller, my thumb naturally gravitates towards the C buttons, which are exactly where the A, B, X, and Y buttons would be on the Switch Pro controller. And since the buttons are so much bigger than on the original N64 controller, they're much closer in size to the A and B buttons, so they're harder to distinguish just by touch. So often, I'll pick up the controller and I'll go to do something and nothing's happening. And I have to look down and I'll go, oh, I'm pressing the C buttons. Now, obviously, this isn't a problem that everybody's going to have. This is just a personal issue with me since I'm so used to using my Switch Pro controller. So I really do need to work on adjusting my grip when using this. Now, a similar issue I'm having is, again, with the grip. So on the back, we have two Z triggers, which do the exact same thing, and we have an L and an R, which it's nice. We have easy access to all the buttons, whereas like on the original N64 controller, you usually didn't have access to the L button, though to be fair, it was rarely ever actually used in game. Now my problem is, again, my natural habit when I'm holding my Switch Pro controller is to just kind of rest my fingers on my ZR and ZL buttons. Yes, I use the other buttons as well, but I kind of just tend to rest my fingers there. So, when I'm using the Brawler 64, again, since it feels like a Switch Pro controller kind of, my mind's like, oh, okay, I'm holding my normal controller. And my fingers, again, naturally gravitates to the both Z buttons. Now that's a problem since they do the same thing. It's not like this Z button is R, it's just Z. So, I have to now work on adjusting my grip so that I use R and Z and the left Z. Not really a huge issue. It's just something to take note of, is I personally have been struggling with it quite a bit, is just adjusting my grip to using the opposite diagonal buttons. Now, overall, this controller feels great to use. The buttons are kind of clicky and have a much more tactile feel to them than the original N64 controller. Now, I think that's actually kind of nice that the buttons are a little bit more tactile. It feels a little bit more professional and less like a toy to me. Now, the thumbstick is actually pretty nice. It's got a nice rubber cap, which, it helps with your grip, although it's a very smooth cap on it, so that, without any texturing, you are still kind of likely to potentially slip off. But being made out of rubber is a little bit better and more comfortable than the plastic of the original N64 controller's thumbstick. Now, the thumbstick itself, it feels great. It's so nice and smooth and hopefully more durable than the original controller. I would assume it's more durable since it's newer. I haven't heard of anyone having issues with this. I haven't played mine enough to know if there will be an issue. But yeah, I think the thumbstick is really nice. It feels smooth. My only major complaint with the thumbstick is, and this might just be my head, it feels like it's slightly taller than most other controllers, but it's not uncomfortable by any means. And actually, on the contrary, I think it's probably one of the more comfortable thumbsticks I've used. Again, short of the Switch Pro controller. Even the D-pad feels pretty nice to use. Obviously, that's not a big deal since very few N64 games made use of it, but in games like Kirby 64, it's a must having a nice D-pad. And personally, I actually kind of prefer this one over the original. I just have a bit of an easier time controlling Kirby with it. As I mentioned before, I like having the shoulder buttons all within easy reach. My only complaint really is that there are two Z buttons that do the exact same thing. It'd be nice if you could remap them so that you could have one Z button be your regular Z and the other one be something else, but it's not really a big deal. It's just kind of weird that they do the exact same thing. Now, my major concern when I got this, being that it's the wireless version, is I was worried about input lag. So yeah, it comes with this receiver that you plug into the console, and I was worried that there would be some amount of input lag just naturally from the wireless transmission and whatever this is doing to process it and send it out to the N64. Luckily, that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, I have no way of testing this, but I personally don't notice any input lag at all playing on this controller. It feels great. I have no issues at all. I'm really happy with it. Now, you do have to pair this when you get it. It doesn't come prepared from Retro Fighters. There's a manual in the box, and it has nice instructions on how to pair it. I had an issue with mine, though, where I plug it in, I follow the instructions exactly to pair it, and nothing was happening. It wasn't connecting, which I started getting concerned. But if you read closer in the instructions, it says that if you press, there's a small reset button on the back of the controller, and if you press it in with a paper clip, it should pair, and it did. I did that, it reset the controller in whatever way, it paired right away, and I haven't had an issue since. Now that after the initial pairing, every time you turn on the console, you just hit the start button, it connects right away, and you can play. Something else to note about this, now this is specific to the wireless version, is the wireless receiver has on it the memory pack slot. You can stick your memory pack in and it works great. Now, I kind of like that the slot is on the receiver because I have this memory card plus here, which, you know, it's got basically 4 memory cards in one, but it's much longer than the standard memory pack, so it sticks out from the back of the controller. It's kind of annoying, and since I only have, I think, 2 games that make use of it, I usually never have it in. You know, even playing Mario Kart, I rarely ever have this in for the ghosts. But now, since it goes in here and goes into the console itself, it's not going to bother me sticking out the back of the controller, so I can just leave this in, which I personally kind of like. But you should note that, as far as I'm aware, I think the memory pack is the only accessory that this actually supports. The transfer pack, I'm pretty sure, is not supported with this, and obviously you don't want to use a rumble pack with this because it'll just start vibrating your console. That's actually another gripe I have about this controller, is that this does not have any sort of rumble support. You know, obviously you can't plug it, you know, the rumble pack into it since the slot is only on the receiver. The wired version of this controller has the slot on the controller itself since it's wired, and it does support the rumble pack. It's just the wireless version does not. You know, one thing I would like to see changed in a future revision of this is if they added built-in rumble. I don't know if they actually can. I don't know how rumble works on the Nintendo 64. But that would be a really nice addition if they added rumble to a future revision of this, so that, you know, it's there for any games that support it. You don't have to worry about plugging it in. And now, it's not really a huge deal for me, as I don't actually even own a rumble pack, but that's just something to be aware of, that if your heart is set on using rumble, you might want to get the wired version and not the wireless. But yeah, so that's just a very quick look at the Brawler 64 controller from Retro Fighters. So my overall thoughts, I absolutely love it. This is my go-to controller now for playing the Nintendo 64. Even as someone who appreciates the original controller, this is just so much better in basically every way. Again, really the only major issues I have are the fact that you can't remap the buttons, which would be nice but not really necessary, and the fact that it has no rumble support at all. Now, maybe in the future they're planning on adding rumble to the wireless version, but it's really not a deal breaker, as, again, I don't own a rumble pack even, so I'm not used to it. I don't really care about rumble for these older games. I don't even think that many N64 games support rumble. I'm not actually sure how many there are that do. I have a very small Nintendo 64 collection. Now, would I recommend you buy this? Absolutely. If you're a Nintendo 64 fan and you don't already own this, you can't really go wrong. So the wireless version is $45, the wired version is $35. At that price, you really can't go wrong for such a well-made and comfortable to use controller. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. Have you used one of these controllers before? If not, what kind of N64 controller do you usually use? Prior to this, I only ever used an original N64 controller, but this is absolutely my new go-to controller. It's just so comfortable to use. Please let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. Well, until next time, so long.